In part 4 of our look at chapter 11, I want to just tie up, so to speak, one other example of price discrimination called tying, and then let's take a brief look at advertising. So tying is when you buy one product from a firm, and then you're tied to buying another product from the same firm. Okay, so it's like bundling. They're tied together, but generally the good that you're buying afterwards. So it's sometime in the future, and it continues on and on and on. So one of the best examples is printers and inkjet cartridges. And so you buy a HP printer, and then you're locked into HP inkjet cartridges. And note that the price of inkjet cartridges is pretty high. Okay, so new car warranties, you buy the car, and then you can extend the warranty into the future. So so a few years goes down, and your original warranty is wearing out, and so you can purchase another warranty. And also, so McDonald's, almost all of McDonald's are franchises, and so the franchisor, which in this case McDonald's, requires franchisees. So it's like you buy a McDonald's franchise, and then you are tied to buying inputs, so hamburger, fries, etc., from McDonald's on into the future. So one advantage of tying is then McDonald's, for example, can maintain product quality. And so when did McDonald's arise? So after World War II, soldiers come back, the interstate highway system is built, and America takes to the roads. Well, before fast food restaurants, the quality of the food at roadside diners was almost universally terrible, because you're driving along a highway, there's a roadside diner, most of the customers from that roadside diner are just passing through. They're never going to come there again. So the roadside diner doesn't rely on repeat business. Okay, so it serves a bad quality meal because a bad quality meal costs less, and so diners eat it. They would never go back to that restaurant because the food's terrible, but they're not going to go back anyway because they're heading on down the road. So the quality of roadside dining establishments was almost universally really bad. So McDonald's sees an opportunity. It's like, hey, we'll put a McDonald's in. You may not buy from this particular McDonald's, but we want you to buy from another McDonald's someplace else. So they have now an incentive to serve a better quality meal. Demand metering is kind of like well, let's go back to the HP printer and inkjet cartridges. If people are willing to pay high prices for the inkjet cartridges, that signals to Hewlett Packard like, hey, we can probably raise our price of printers. If people aren't willing to pay higher prices for inkjet cartridges, it's like, oh, maybe people don't value it as much, so we better lower the price on our. So it provides a way of metering the demand. Okay, so you got market power in the inkjet printer market, then that extends the market power into inkjet cartridges. Excuse me. Okay, so quick look at advertising. Okay, so what do we? If you're a marketing major, what are we trying to do when we advertise? What does a firm want to happen? Well, obviously you want to increase the demand for your product. You also want to convince consumers that there's nothing else quite like it, so you want to make the demand more inelastic, because if the demand for your product is more inelastic, you can charge a higher price. And you also want to signal like, hey, this is high quality stuff, and so hopefully you're willing to pay more for high quality. Okay, so firm wants to increase demand. As the demand curve shifts out, so does the marginal revenue curve. Now there's advertising costs, but that's part of the firm's fixed costs. Doesn't affect marginal cost. So you want what you want is you want an increase in the total revenue that's more than an increase in the total cost. Okay, so here's an example. So we're going to increase advertising. Our costs are going to shift up. So here's AC. Let me get this. Here's our average cost without advertising. Here's our original demand curve. Okay, so that's this. Here's our original demand curve. Here's our original marginal revenue curve. So, so now we're going to equate marginal revenue with marginal cost. And so we're going to charge this price, and here's the profit. Now we advertise. It's going to cost us. So average cost curve shifts up because we've increased our fixed cost. And so now here's the new demand curve. Here's a new marginal revenue curve here. And we're going to increase our sales through advertising. And at the same time, we get to increase price. And our profit has just gone up. Okay, so how much advertising do we do? Should we just increase advertising until the additional revenue equals the additional cost? Well, let's look. So we saw that successful advertising increases revenues and costs. So we got to consider, okay, what's the increased revenue that we're getting from advertising? So then there's the cost of the advertising itself, and then there's also the cost of increasing output. So remember, quantity is going to increase. So we're going to move up on the marginal cost curve. Okay, so here's the profit for the firm. It's price and quantity, total revenue, which is a function of the price of the product and advertising. So profit's total revenue minus the cost of production minus the cost of advertising. Okay, so there's a couple of rules of thumb here that we're going to look at. So we're going to say, okay, well, here's our sales. How much advertising should we do? So here's our rule of thumb for pricing. So if we've got advertising in the mix, it's going to look like this. Okay, so we've got price. Here's our markup. Here's our effects on advertising. Simplify it. We've got this is advertising to sales ratio. Okay, so we know that this is the rule of thumb pricing. This is this. So now we have, here's the advertising. How much should we do? Well, it depends on both the elasticity of advertising. If we spend money on advertising, how much is our sales going to go up? And it's also dependent on the price elasticity of demand for the product. Okay. So how much should we do? Well, depends on price elasticity of advertising and the price elasticity of the product. So let's look at a couple examples. So for supermarkets, the advertising elasticity is generally about like this, moderately inelastic. For supermarkets in general, it's pretty elastic, the demand for the products itself. Okay, so usually we've got advertising amounts for 1 to 3% of sales. Now for convenience stores, they're usually convenience stores located in New York City or close to your house. Okay, so elasticity is a little bit less elastic, right? Because it's got some advantage. It's got locational advantages, and so it's got a very low advertising elasticity. And so the result is, so we've got advertising by supermarkets like Albertsons and Safeway and stuff. And does your little neighborhood market do advertising? No. Okay, so with designer jeans, the demand for name brand designer jeans is relatively inelastic. It's got a high advertising to sales ratio. Why? Because it's got a large advertising elasticity. So if designer jeans advertise, that increases sales by a lot. Okay, so what's their advertising to sales ratios? Usually about 10 to 20%. Laundry detergent about the same. Relatively high advertising expenditures. So here's some advertising sales to advertising ratios across different firms. So Tylenol, yes, because there's so if Tylenol advertises, it's it's going to increase sales. They don't advertise, sales go down, and so here's all. So anyway, here's all of these. Okay, so that's it for advertising. It was a brief look, and we're finished with chapter 11 on price discrimination.